Stop scrolling for just 60 seconds. This gets absolutely wild. Picture this. You're sitting in your own backyard, minding your business, when suddenly police cars roll up because your HOA president called you in as a dangerous trespasser. Plot twist? You literally own the house she's been renting for 3 years. Yeah, that happened to me last month. Before we dive in, quick question for you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? Drop a comment below because I guarantee half of you have stories that'll make your blood boil. Also, where are you watching from? I love seeing our community grow. My name's David, and 6 months ago I thought I'd escaped to paradise. After 15 years managing supply chains for corporate America and a divorce that cost me everything except my sanity, I inherited my uncle's lake house in Pine Ridge, Wisconsin. Population 2,800, where the biggest controversy used to be whether the 4th of July fireworks should start at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. Here's where it gets interesting. Stick with me because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. The property sits on 3 acres of absolute heaven. Crystal Lake stretches out like a mirror, reflecting pine trees that have been standing since before Wisconsin was a state. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of water lapping against the dock and air so clean it made my lungs forget about 15 years of office building recycled air. For exactly 4 months, Pine Ridge lived up to its peaceful reputation. 62 properties scattered around 10 miles of shoreline, mostly working-class folks and retirees who followed one simple rule: wave when you see each other, help when someone needs it, and mind your own damn business the rest of the time. Then Hurricane Patricia arrived. Patricia Whitman bought the most expensive house on the lake, a $900,000 monstrosity that looked like someone had airdropped a suburban Chicago mansion into the Wisconsin wilderness by mistake. Within her first week, she'd introduced herself to every property owner by speedboat, always wearing those blindingly white tennis outfits and carrying a clipboard like she was conducting a census. Sweet as artificial sugar on the surface, but her eyes had the warmth of a January morning on the lake. The morning everything changed, and trust me, you're not going to believe what happened next. I was drinking coffee on my deck, watching the sunrise paint everything gold, when I heard the aggressive rumble of an overpowered speedboat cutting through the morning stillness like a chainsaw through silk. "Good morning, neighbor." Patricia's voice carried across the water with all the sincerity of a telemarketing call. She pulled up to my dock wearing a smile that belonged in a toothpaste commercial and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no in your entire life. "I'm Patricia Whitman, president of the Crystal Lake Homeowners Association." She produced a leather portfolio with the theatrical flair of a magician, revealing the final trick. "I'm here on official business regarding some community standard violations." I set my coffee mug down carefully, that old corporate instinct kicking in, the one that kept me alive through hostile takeovers and budget meetings. "What homeowners association?" Her plastic smile flickered like a broken fluorescent light. "The one that protects our property values from declining influences." She gestured toward my uncle's vintage aluminum fishing boat like she was identifying evidence at a crime scene. "That eyesore has got to go, and frankly, all this fishing equipment scattered around makes the whole area look like a bait shop had a yard sale." Pause right here. Can you believe this woman? The audacity is off the charts. But wait, it gets so much worse. My declining influence was a 1987 Lund that had probably caught more fish than her fancy floating palace ever would. The scattered equipment was my uncle's handcrafted rod holders and a tackle box that was older than she was, each piece seasoned by 40 years of Wisconsin weather and family memories. "Lady, this property has been in my family since before you were born. There's no HOA covenant on my deed, and there sure as hell won't be one now." The mask dropped completely. Her voice turned Arctic cold. "We'll see about that, won't we, city boy?" She gunned that speedboat engine like she was fleeing a crime scene, sending a wake that slammed into my dock hard enough to spill my coffee and scatter the ducks. The smell of burning gasoline and expensive perfume lingered in the morning air like a threat. What happened 3 days later will blow your mind. Seriously, the plot twist is coming and it's absolutely insane. An envelope appeared on my front door like a parking ticket from hell. Inside was the most elaborate piece of fiction I'd seen since my ex-wife's alimony demands. Crystal Lake Homeowners Association violation notice blazed across expensive letterhead in blood-red letters. Apparently, I owed $750 for failure to maintain waterfront aesthetic standards and had 21 days to comply or face additional penalties and potential property liens. The document looked impressive. Official seals, case numbers, legal-sounding language that would make most people panic and write a check immediately. Too bad it was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Time for some detective work. And this is where my corporate background actually paid off. The Dane County Courthouse basement smelled like old files and broken dreams, where fluorescent lights hummed over decades of bureaucratic warfare. During my corporate days, I'd learned that the best intelligence always comes from people who've been filing papers longer than you've been breathing. So I made friends with Martha, the 70-something county clerk who knew where every skeleton was buried in every file cabinet. "Another HOA victim, honey," she whispered, pulling out my property file with hands that shook slightly but moved with practiced precision. "That Whitman woman's been in here 8 times this month asking about lien procedures and enforcement authority. Between you and me, she doesn't know her rear end from a legal brief. Here's what I discovered, and this is where the story takes a turn that's going to make your jaw drop. My deed was crystal clear. No covenants, no restrictions, no HOA authority whatsoever. But here's where my corporate training kicked in. Always check what the competition is really doing while they're distracting you with paperwork theater. Patricia's Crystal Lake Homeowners Association existed all right, incorporated 14 months ago with exactly 9 members out of 62 lake properties. In legal terms, they had about as much authority over my property as my neighbor's golden retriever. But while cross-referencing ownership records, my corporate paranoia detector started screaming. Several lakefront properties had recently transferred to Whitman Holdings LLC. A quick business license search revealed the truth that changed everything. Our self-appointed HOA queen was running an unlicensed vacation rental empire, turning quiet family lake houses into party destinations for Milwaukee tourists. The woman lecturing me about community standards was actually the one destroying them. Remember that detail. It becomes crucial later. Trust me, this gets absolutely wild. Armed with this intelligence, I decided to test community sentiment. Facebook might be where brain cells go to die, but it's also where you discover who's really paying attention in your neighborhood. My post was simple. Has anyone else received violation notices from the Crystal Lake HOA, asking for educational purposes? My phone exploded faster than a 4th of July firework. 11 different lake residents sent private messages, each with their own Patricia horror story. She'd been systematically working around the lake like a legal intimidation tornado, threatening elderly widows over bird feeders and young families over dock colors. Sarah, a retired teacher with organizational skills that would make the FBI weep with envy, had been documenting everything in a color-coded spreadsheet that looked like evidence for a federal case. Mike from the boat launch shared photos of Patricia's bounced checks and unpaid fuel bills. Even 85-year-old Eleanor chimed in with observations about suspicious late-night activity at Patricia's supposed family rentals. I created a private group chat called Lake Defense Squad, because if you're going to fight crazy, you might as well embrace the superhero drama. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. What Patricia said next proved she'd completely lost her mind. "David, sweetie," Patricia's voice oozed through the speaker like honey mixed with industrial poison. "I saw your little Facebook post. You're making this unnecessarily complicated for yourself." "Just asking questions, Patricia. Neighborly curiosity." "Oh, honey, you really don't want to go down this road with me." Her voice dropped to that special tone certain people use when they're about to threaten your credit rating. "I have connections you couldn't imagine, and I will absolutely report you to the appropriate authorities for harassment and cyberbullying." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what kind of connections a vacation rental scammer thought she had with local law enforcement. What happened next proves that when people get desperate, they make spectacularly stupid decisions. Seriously, what she did next is borderline criminal, and I caught it all on camera. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Jake Morrison from County Code Enforcement, looking about as enthusiastic as a man facing a tax audit. His pickup truck crunched across my gravel driveway at exactly 9 a.m. because apparently Patricia believed in punctuality when filing bogus complaints. "Mr. David, sorry to bother you, but I've got to follow up on reports about dock violations and an abandoned vehicle." Jake looked embarrassed, which told me everything about the quality of Patricia's accusations. I poured him coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of the battery acid they serve at government offices, and we walked down to examine my supposedly criminal dock setup. Jake measured everything twice, checked his clipboard, then shook his head like a man who'd wasted his morning on absolute nonsense. "Between you and me," he said, lowering his voice even though we were alone, "this is the 31st complaint I've gotten from the same address in 4 months. Lady's got our office on speed dial." That's when Jake let slip something that made my corporate fraud detectors start screaming. Patricia had actually tried to slip him a $200 bill during their last encounter, claiming it was a consulting fee for finding creative interpretations of building codes. The woman wasn't just playing neighborhood dictator, she was testing the waters for small-time corruption. My uncle always said, you can judge people by how they treat service workers and government employees. Apparently, Patricia's strategy was to either intimidate them or buy them off. What happened at her HOA meeting that evening was like watching democracy get mugged in broad daylight. The Lake Defense Squad attended Patricia's emergency community meeting as observers, which was about as democratic as a North Korean election. The gathering took place in her mansion's great room, a space so aggressively decorated it looked like a furniture showroom had exploded in shades of beige and gold. Only 5 people showed up, mostly property managers from a rental empire who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else on planet Earth. Patricia had prepared an elaborate PowerPoint presentation titled Protecting Our Community Investment, complete with pie charts about property values and photos of non-compliant properties that somehow all belonged to people who'd refused to join her HOA. Sarah, bless her teacher's instincts, took notes like she was documenting war crimes for the International Criminal Court. But the real intelligence came when she noticed Patricia kept checking an expensive Apple Watch and glancing nervously toward the kitchen. During the bathroom break, because nothing says professional meeting like a bathroom break in someone's living room, Sarah followed Patricia and overheard a heated phone conversation that changed everything. "I told you the payments are coming," Patricia hissed into her phone. "These people are more stubborn than we expected, but I've got new strategies, legal pressure, code enforcement, whatever it takes to generate cash flow." The pieces started clicking together like a puzzle made of red flags. This wasn't about community standards or property values. Someone was applying serious financial pressure to Patricia, and she was desperately trying to generate income through harassment and intimidation. I'd seen this pattern before in corporate America. People under extreme financial stress make increasingly desperate decisions until they cross lines they never thought they'd cross. The question was, who was holding Patricia's financial leash? My answer came faster than I expected, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. While researching her attorney, the same guy who'd sent me that threatening cease and desist letter, I discovered he specialized in foreclosure defense and bankruptcy law. Not exactly the kind of lawyer you hire for neighborhood disputes unless you're already drowning in legal problems. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I filed my own complaint against Patricia for harassment, filing false reports, and using county resources for personal vendettas. 2 could play the bureaucracy game, and I'd had plenty of practice dealing with corporate red tape. Then I took it one step further and made the discovery that would change everything. Using the property management company's contact information from the rental listings, I reached out to find the actual owner of Patricia's mansion. Turns out Lakefront Properties Management was very interested to hear about their tenants' creative interpretation of lease agreements and unauthorized business activities. Sheriff's Deputy Williams, who'd been tracking the pattern of complaints from our lake, pulled me aside after I filed my counter-complaint with information that made my head spin. "Off the record," he said, leaning against his patrol car while evening light caught the lake like scattered diamonds. "We've been documenting everything. Nothing criminal yet, but she's walking a very thin line, and we're watching." That night, sitting on my deck with the sound of gentle waves mixing with distant laughter from an actual family barbecue across the lake, I realized Patricia had made a fundamental tactical error. She'd assumed everyone would roll over like scared civilians. Instead, she'd accidentally united a community that had been quietly minding its own business for decades. The smell of charcoal and honest conversation drifted across the water, mixing with the pine-scented evening air that still meant home. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight the good guys were winning. If Patricia thought code enforcement was her nuclear option, she clearly hadn't graduated to actual weapons of mass bureaucratic destruction yet. That honor was reserved for what happened at 5:45 a.m. on a Thursday morning that started peaceful and went sideways faster than a shopping cart with a broken wheel. I was enjoying my morning coffee ritual, that sacred first sip that makes you believe the world might not be completely insane, when the unmistakable crunch of police car tires on gravel shattered the lake's morning calm. Blue light strobed across my cabin walls like some twisted aurora borealis, and I could practically feel Patricia's satisfaction radiating from her mansion deck across the water. 2 officers climbed out of their patrol car, looking about as thrilled as mall security guards called to break up a senior citizen food court argument. The younger cop had that fresh-faced earnestness of someone who still believed every 911 call was a genuine emergency. His partner, a grizzled veteran with sergeant stripes and the weary expression of a man who'd seen every flavor of human stupidity, clearly knew this was going to be another waste of taxpayer money. "Mr. David, we've received reports that you're trespassing on private property and made threatening statements toward a female resident. I invited them in for coffee because honestly, if you're going to be falsely accused at dawn, you might as well be civilized about it." The senior officer, Sergeant Peterson, according to his name tag, accepted gratefully, probably because he knew government coffee tastes like liquid regret mixed with budget cuts. "Sir, we have to respond to all calls," Peterson said, settling into my uncle's old kitchen chair that creaked like a ship in a storm. "But between you and me, this complaint doesn't pass the smell test." That's when I produced my secret weapon, and this is where Patricia's plan completely backfires. Documentation, security camera footage, property deeds, the complete timeline of Patricia's harassment campaign. Even Jake, the code enforcement officer's written statement about attempted bribery. I'd learned in corporate America that paperwork wins wars, and this particular battle was about to get very one-sided. Peterson reviewed the footage of my supposed threatening behavior, which showed me helping elderly Eleanor load fishing gear into her car while Patricia lurked behind her mansion's windows like some suburban spy novel villain. The trespassing occurred on a public access road that had been public since before Patricia was born, despite the shiny new private property signs she'd posted overnight like some kind of legal fairy. "Son," Peterson muttered, shaking his head at the footage, "either you're the world's most polite terrorist or somebody's been yanking our chain." While the officers were reviewing my evidence, my phone rang with news that would make this story absolutely explosive. Dave Harrison, a private investigator who moonlighted at the local marina and looked like he could arm wrestle a bear and win, had finished the background check I'd commissioned. What he'd discovered would have made a soap opera writer weep with envy. Patricia Whitman owed $62,000 in unpaid HOA fees from her previous community in Milwaukee. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife and serve it at the county fair. She'd been sued by that HOA and lost, which explained her intimate knowledge of legal intimidation tactics. More concerning, she owed money to everyone from contractors to credit card companies, with a pattern of using legal threats to delay payments until creditors gave up or settled for pennies. But here's where it got really interesting, and this detail becomes crucial in about 30 seconds. Dave had discovered that Patricia's rental operation violated 4 different zoning ordinances, none of which required business licenses she'd never bothered to obtain. The county had no record of her vacation rental business, which meant she'd been operating illegally while lecturing everyone else about community standards. The Lake Defense Squad had grown to 18 lake residents, each with their own Patricia horror story that would make your blood boil. Mike at the marina revealed she owed $400 in dock fees and had threatened to sue him for discrimination when he demanded payment. The hardware store owners shared security footage of Patricia ordering supplies, then disputing the charges with her credit card company, claiming defective materials she'd never returned. The pattern was clear as lake water on a calm morning. Patricia used legal intimidation to avoid paying legitimate debts, hoping people would rather write off the loss than fight her in court. Peterson finished reviewing my documentation and shook his head like a man who just realized he'd been hunting unicorns. "Mr. David, I strongly suggest you consider filing charges for filing false police reports. This lady's been using us as her personal enforcement army, and that stops today." As the officers drove away, their tires crunching across gravel that now sounded like victory, I noticed Patricia's silhouette disappearing from her mansion window. The morning mist was rising off the lake, carrying with it the clean scent of pine and possibility. My attorney had scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning, claiming he had news that would change everything. Something in his voice suggested Patricia's house of cards was about to collapse in ways she never saw coming. What my lawyer revealed the next morning was so shocking, I literally had to sit down. "Are you ready for this?" Arthur Preston had been my uncle's lawyer since the Carter administration, and at 75, he still dressed like he was arguing cases before the Supreme Court. His office smelled like old leather and expensive cigars, with law books stacked so high they threatened to topple over and bury unwary clients in centuries of legal precedent. "David, you might want to sit down for this," Arthur said, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses that had probably witnessed the signing of the Constitution. "I've been reviewing your uncle's estate more carefully, and there's something we missed." He spread documents across his mahogany desk like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Property deeds, trust agreements, incorporation papers, all bearing signatures and dates I'd never seen before. "When your uncle died, you inherited more than just the lake house," Arthur continued, his voice carrying that careful tone lawyers use when they're about to drop nuclear bombs. "In 1985, he created the Northwoods Property Trust as a tax shelter. You now own 65% controlling interest in a trust that holds 6 lakefront properties." My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. 6 properties, including the $900,000 mansion currently occupied by one Patricia Whitman. The words hit me like a slap with a wet fish. I'd been fighting my own tenant without knowing it. For 6 months, Patricia had been paying rent to a property management company that deposited her payments into an account I never knew existed. The woman who'd been terrorizing me about property standards was literally putting money in my pocket every month. Arthur pulled out a lease agreement thick enough to stop bullets. "Your uncle was thorough. This lease includes clauses about peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties, prohibition of unlicensed business activities, and maintaining community harmony. Ms. Whitman has violated approximately 16 different terms." The irony was so perfect it felt like divine intervention. Patricia had been harassing her own landlord while falling behind on rent payments, operating illegal businesses in violation of her lease, and systematically disturbing other tenants in the same property trust. "How behind is she on rent?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. 3 months, with late fees accumulating daily. The property management company was actually preparing eviction proceedings, but they needed trust approval. That's you, by the way. I stared at the documents, my mind racing through 6 months of mystery deposits I'd attributed to some uncle's investment account. Patricia's desperate behavior suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't just facing harassment complaints and zoning violations. She was about to lose her home base for her entire rental operation. Arthur, she doesn't know I'm her landlord, does she? His weathered face cracked into a smile that belonged in a courtroom victory photo. Not unless she's considerably smarter than her recent behavior suggests. The strategic implications hit me like a tactical revelation. I could evict Patricia immediately for lease violations, but that felt like winning through technicality rather than justice. My uncle had always taught me that real power meant knowing when not to use it. What would you recommend? Arthur leaned back in his chair, which creaked like old ship timbers in a storm. Give her one final opportunity to make this right. Document everything. Offer mediation. Show you tried to resolve things reasonably. Courts appreciate landlords who exhaust diplomatic options before pulling the nuclear trigger. But if she escalated further, Arthur tapped the eviction notice he'd already prepared. 30 days to vacate for multiple lease violations. Clean, legal, and absolutely devastating to her financial house of cards. I walked out of Arthur's office, feeling like I'd discovered I'd been playing chess while everyone else thought we were playing checkers. The afternoon sun painted Main Street golden, and for the first time in months, I felt like the universe might actually have a sense of humor. Patricia Whitman, HOA dictator and vacation rental queen, had been paying her worst enemy to let her destroy his peace and quiet. Sometimes the best revenge is discovering you held all the cards from the very beginning. What happened next proved that when desperate people run out of legal options, they usually do one of two things: accept defeat gracefully, or double down on stupid until they achieve legendary status. Patricia, being Patricia, chose door number 2 with the enthusiasm of a kamikaze pilot heading for an aircraft carrier. County Commissioner Bill Hayes had been serving Pine Ridge for 14 years without a single ethics complaint, which made Patricia's approach about as welcome as a tornado at a church picnic. According to Bill's later testimony, she strutted into his office Tuesday morning carrying a designer purse and the kind of confidence that comes from huffing your own supply of entitlement. "Commissioner Hayes, I have a proposition that could benefit both of us," Patricia announced, sliding an envelope across his desk like she was buying state secrets instead of trying to bribe a small-town politician who probably made less than her monthly spa budget. $7,000 cash for consulting services regarding the environmental hazard posed by David's property. She actually used air quotes while suggesting my uncle's lake house should be condemned as a threat to water quality. Bill Hayes had been in politics long enough to recognize corruption when it walked into his office wearing white capris and desperation perfume. He immediately reported the attempted bribery to the district attorney's office, triggering an investigation that would make Watergate look like a parking ticket dispute. But Patricia wasn't finished shopping her criminal services around town like some kind of corruption door-to-door salesperson. She made similar approaches to the zoning inspector and even attempted to bribe a sheriff's deputy with what she called a community safety donation for overlooking her minor business license oversights. The zoning inspector, a by-the-book guy named Carl who treated building codes like holy scripture, actually wore a wire during their second meeting. The recording quality was so clear you could hear Patricia's jewelry jingling as she counted out bills while explaining how David, the unstable veteran, needed to be relocated for community safety. Sheriff's Deputy Williams documented her bribery attempt in an official report that read like a criminal justice textbook example of how not to influence public officials. The woman had managed to turn a neighborhood dispute into a federal case faster than you could say conspiracy to commit corruption. When Arthur called with news about the district attorney's investigation, his voice carried that special tone lawyers use when they're trying not to sound too satisfied about their client's vindication. "David, she's facing potential prison time. Bribery of public officials is a felony that carries serious consequences." I felt conflicted in ways my corporate training hadn't prepared me for. I'd wanted justice, not to watch someone's life implode in real time. But Patricia had crossed lines that transformed neighbor disputes into criminal territory, and there was no putting that toothpaste back in the tube. The local newspaper editor, who'd been tracking the story with the persistence of a bloodhound following bacon grease, contacted me for an interview. "This has grown beyond neighborhood problems," she explained. "Public corruption allegations are legitimate news, and the community deserves to know what's happening." The media attention triggered Patricia's final public meltdown, which occurred at the boat launch in front of 32 witnesses who probably thought they were just coming to launch their fishing boats, not watch a daytime television drama unfold in real time. "This is all conspiracy," Patricia screamed, pointing at me with enough venom to kill small wildlife. "He's been stalking and terrorizing me for months. I demand he pay my legal fees and moving expenses." The accusation was so ridiculous that several witnesses actually laughed out loud. Eleanor, who'd been loading fishing gear with the patience of someone who'd outlived 3 husbands and 2 presidents, finally spoke up with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to say exactly what she thought. "Honey, I've lived on this lake for 60 years, and you're the problem here. That boy hasn't done anything but fish and mind his own business while you've been running around threatening lawsuits like some kind of legal terrorist." The crowd nodded agreement like a Greek chorus of common sense. Several people pulled out phones to record what was clearly going to be social media gold. Patricia realized she'd lost all community support and stormed off, threatening to hire real lawyers with money she clearly didn't have. That evening, Arthur advised me to reveal the landlord relationship publicly at the next town council meeting. "Time to end this before she hurts herself or someone else more seriously," he said, organizing documents with the precision of a man planning a courtroom victory. "Her criminal behavior has forced your hand." Word spread through town faster than gossip at a church potluck. The county attorney would attend to observe potential witness testimony, while the regional newspapers sent a reporter after hearing about corruption investigations in small-town America. If you've never seen 400 small-town residents pack into a high school gymnasium for what was supposed to be a routine town council meeting, you're missing out on democracy's greatest spectator sport. The energy felt like a championship basketball game crossed with a public execution, except the popcorn was homemade, and the drama was absolutely real. Local businesses had closed early, so owners could attend what everyone was calling the Great Lake Showdown. The regional TV news crew set up cameras like they were covering a presidential debate, while county officials filled the back row with the grim satisfaction of people about to watch justice served with a side of public accountability. Patricia arrived fashionably late with her expensive Milwaukee lawyer, a slick-looking guy in a $2,000 suit who probably charged more per hour than most folks made in a week. She dressed for battle in a white power suit that screamed, "I'm important," while her nervous energy suggested she knew the walls were closing in faster than her credit payments. I approached the podium feeling calmer than I had in months, carrying a manila folder that contained enough documentation to sink a battleship. The gymnasium fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of someone's stomach growling. Apparently, democracy makes people hungry. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, looking out at faces I'd learned to call neighbors over the past few months. 6 months ago, I thought I was dealing with a simple neighbor dispute. Tonight, I'd like to share what I've actually discovered. Arthur had prepared a presentation that would make corporate executives weep with envy. Property ownership documents projected onto the gymnasium's pull-down screen in letters large enough to read from the parking lot. The audience gasped in unison when the truth became clear, a sound like 400 people simultaneously realizing they'd been watching a magic trick performed in reverse. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been Patricia Whitman's landlord for the past 6 months without knowing it." The gymnasium erupted like a stadium after a game-winning touchdown. Applause, laughter, and more than a few "I knew it" shouts echoed off the basketball hoops while Patricia's face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a microwave. Arthur's timeline of lease violations played out like a greatest hits collection of tenant nightmares. Security camera footage of harassment incidents drew actual boos from the audience, while audio recordings of bribery attempts made the county attorney sit up straighter and start taking notes that looked suspiciously like arrest warrants. Patricia's lawyer attempted damage control with the desperation of someone trying to plug a dam with chewing gum. My client was unaware of the ownership structure and acted in good faith to protect community standards. The audience's laughter was so loud it probably registered on seismic equipment in neighboring counties. Eleanor, sitting in the front row with the confidence of someone who'd earned the right to speak truth to power, shouted, "Good faith, my ass," loud enough to make the pastor cover his ears and the newspaper reporter scribble frantically. Financial records showing unpaid bills and fraudulent business operations scrolled across the screen like a criminal psychology textbook written in spreadsheet format. Local business owners openly discussed Patricia's creative payment avoidance strategies while Mike from the marina held up photocopies of bounced checks like evidence in a fraud trial. That's when I delivered the line I'd been practicing in my bathroom mirror for 3 days. "Ms. Whitman, I offered you respect as a neighbor and reasonable discussion as a community member. You chose intimidation, harassment, and criminal behavior instead." I held up the official eviction notice, crisp and legal and absolutely devastating. "As your landlord, I'm giving you 30 days' notice to vacate for multiple lease violations. This could have been handled privately and respectfully." The standing ovation lasted so long I thought the fire marshal might issue noise violations. Eleanor led the applause like a conductor directing the world's most enthusiastic orchestra, while several Lake Defense Squad members wiped away tears that might have been joy, relief, or both. Patricia stood up with the dramatic flair of someone who'd clearly been practicing courtroom scenes in her own bathroom mirror. "This is all lies and conspiracy," she shouted, pointing at me with enough venom to poison a small lake. "He's bought off law enforcement and the media. This is harassment and discrimination." Sheriff's Deputy Williams moved closer as Patricia's voice escalated beyond indoor conversation levels. Her lawyer physically restrained her from approaching the podium, probably saving her from additional criminal charges involving public disturbance and potential assault. The TV reporter interviewed me afterward with questions that felt like softballs pitched by a sympathetic grandmother. What message do you have for other people dealing with HOA abuse? Document everything, know your rights, and remember that bullies only win when good people stay silent. The next day's newspaper headline read, "Lake Dispute Exposes Bribery Scheme." And suddenly our little neighborhood drama became a cautionary tale about power, corruption, and the importance of reading your property deeds carefully. As the crowd dispersed that night, chattering like excited teenagers after a concert, I realized we'd accidentally created something beautiful, a community that refused to be intimidated by anyone no matter how loudly they screamed about their importance. Patricia vanished from Pine Ridge faster than a bad check bounces, packing her designer luggage and wounded pride into a U-Haul headed for Florida within 10 days. She left behind a forwarding address that probably wouldn't last 6 months and property damage that looked like a fraternity house after spring break. The criminal case wrapped up with small-town efficiency. Patricia accepted a plea deal for probation and 300 hours of community service, ironic punishment for someone who'd spent months terrorizing her actual community. Her expensive lawyer probably charged more for the plea negotiation than most folks make in a year, but at least justice got served with a side of financial consequences. I never planned on becoming Pine Ridge's accidental community organizer, but apparently defending your fishing rights makes you qualified for leadership positions you never wanted. The Lake Defense Squad evolved into the Pine Ridge Community Watch naturally, establishing reasonable community standards without the fascist tendencies that plague traditional HOAs. We partnered with county environmental agencies on lake conservation, created a neighborhood watch program that focused on actual crime instead of unauthorized bird feeders, and established mediation services for disputes that didn't require lawyers or criminal investigations. The real magic happened when I discovered how to invest 6 months of surprise rental income. The Pine Ridge Community Scholarship Fund started with a revolutionary concept: reward local kids who understood community service instead of community harassment. Every spring, we award scholarships to students pursuing environmental science, law, or public service careers. Our annual fundraiser has become Pine Ridge's premier social event, featuring a fish fry that tastes like heaven, live bluegrass music, and storytelling contests where neighbors share Remember Patricia tales with the affection usually reserved for survived natural disasters. Eleanor won last year's competition with her Oscar-worthy reenactment of telling Patricia exactly where to stick her loyalty demands, complete with gestures that made volunteer firefighters blush and inspired the Methodist minister's sermon about righteous anger serving divine justice. Personal healing arrived like Wisconsin spring, slowly then suddenly bringing life back to places I'd forgotten could bloom. The peace I'd originally sought came with unexpected bonuses, genuine friendships forged in the fires of community resistance, and neighbors who'd proven they'd stand together when bullies tried to divide them. Sarah and I started dating around Thanksgiving, bonding over shared appreciation for proper documentation and her remarkable talent for organizing neighborhood revolutions. Turns out retired teachers make excellent companions when they're not busy toppling vacation rental empires through superior organizational skills. I rediscovered my uncle's woodworking shop, building picnic tables for public lake access areas and teaching local kids how to create useful things instead of frivolous lawsuits. There's profound satisfaction in making something beautiful from raw materials, especially after months dealing with people who created chaos from pure entitlement. Our lake conservation project became a statewide model for community environmental stewardship. Weekend cleanup days remove invasive species while elementary students monitor water quality and learn that protecting nature requires cooperation, not litigation. State agencies now showcase Crystal Lake as proof that communities accomplish remarkable things when they work together instead of tearing each other apart. 3 battle-tested lessons every homeowner needs to survive HOA warfare. First, research deed restrictions before buying property. Most HOA requirements are unenforceable fantasies created by people with law degrees from Google University and too much time on their hands. Second, public record searches reveal anyone's liens, judgments, and business licenses through county websites for free. Knowledge trumps intimidation every single time, and most bullies fold when confronted with actual facts. Third, security cameras and documentation defeat harassment better than any lawyer ever will. Invest in quality equipment and understand local recording laws. Video evidence beats he said, she said arguments in any courtroom, and most harassment stops immediately when people realize they're being recorded. Media coverage transformed our neighborhood drama into inspiration for communities nationwide fighting HOA tyranny. I've appeared on property rights podcasts, spoken at municipal meetings about harassment prevention, and somehow became the unlikely champion for citizens refusing to surrender to bureaucratic bullying. The irony isn't lost on me. A guy who just wanted to fish in peace accidentally became a poster child for community resistance. Last week, Sarah mentioned her cousin's battle with predatory property management companies targeting elderly residents in Green Bay. Same intimidation playbook, she said, showing documentation that triggered my well-developed bullying detection radar. Interesting, I replied, savoring morning coffee that tasted like victory and possibility. Dave Harrison's investigative services are still available, and Arthur's always looking for new windmills to tilt at. This morning, watching sunrise paint Crystal Lake golden while loons call across peaceful water, I hear my uncle's wisdom echoing across time. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everybody. The smell of pine needles mixes with fresh coffee and the promise of another day in a community that learned to fight back against those who mistake authority for permission to abuse others. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments below. Together we can help others fight these battles and win. Document everything. Know your rights. Stand together, and remember, bullies only win when good people stay silent. And if you enjoyed watching justice triumph over entitlement, entwine it with a healthy serving of poetic karma. Smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell for more HOA stories, where ordinary people refuse to let neighborhood tyrants destroy their peace. Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale. Remember, your property, your rights, your community. Don't let anyone take that away from you.